Shameful deals. It is no secret that President Donald Trump is obsessed with deal-making. When he cannot deliver, Trump also likes to pretend to be a deal-maker. Having failed to make progress on his so-called deal of the century, Trump saw an opportunity elsewhere in the region and seized on it. The United Arab Emirates has, as Bahrain has for some time, been in direct contact with the Israeli regime. Trump took advantage of these not-so-secret relations and brought them into the light. During a ceremony at the White House, the UAE and Bahrain signed controversial normalization deals with Israel amid outrage across Palestine and elsewhere in the Muslim world. Trump, who brokered the accords, hailed the occasion as the dawn of a new Middle East.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.
A new dawn indeed. Before the ink on the deals was even dry, Israeli warplanes carried out a series of air raids on the besieged Gaza Strip. Blasted by Palestinians as a betrayal of their cause, a sentiment was echoed by regional players Iran, Turkey and others that said the trend of normalization with Israel will have lasting and unprecedented geopolitical ramifications for the entire region.
Here we are in Ramallah on the eve of the signing of Israel's normalization deal with Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. All Palestinian factions have called for Palestinians to come out to the street and protest this evening. And as you can see, they've come out in their hundreds, though they were expected in their thousands. People are holding Palestinian flags and holding signs which say no normalization to occupation.
Trump claimed that talks were already underway with a number of other Arab regimes to enter the club. What was President Trump's role in the process? And why did the signing ceremony take place at the White House?
Donald Trump is only looking for good press. He wants people to praise him. He wants people to say how wonderful he is. This has been his method of operation since he's been president, and certainly since before that point. He really has no concept of actions and consequences and the geopolitical ramifications of these new agreements. He isn't looking at that. He's simply looking at what will make him look good in the public and what will make people praise him.
What do these Arab states hope to get by normalizing their relations with Israel? Perhaps they want to grow closer to the White House. Trump may be looking to score points as a deal-maker, but what he is doing is simply providing the military and financial infrastructure to further repress popular struggles for democracy and freedom.
These archaic monarchies, these retrogressive monarchies in the Arabian Peninsula, which their biggest fear is from their own people, that they may want someday elections. They may want a more democratic form of government in this region. These archaic monarchies are installed by either the British government or the American government. They are still in power because of the support of London and Washington, and of course lots of intelligence and training which comes from Israel.
What did the Trump administration offer the UAE and Bahrain to get them to formally break the taboo of normalizing with Israel? What's in it for Trump?
For Trump, more than anything else, even thinking about the geopolitical implications of this change, he's thinking about his campaign. He's basically first, into the eyes of the American people, he's trying to promote himself as the deal maker, as the maker of the peace in the international community. However, into the eyes of the lobbyists, especially the Zionist lobby in the United States, as well as the Arab lobbyists, of course, he's doing something in favor of them because it is good for them to have a public relationship, especially they can have openly trade with each other, not in secret anymore. And Trump is making actually this move not only because of his campaign, but also he wants to secure future contracts which may benefit him, Jared Kushner, and other basically allies of Trump's by an open trade between all these Arab nations in the Persian Gulf and Tel Aviv.
For Trump, the trend of Arab-Israeli normalization has become closely linked to his re-election campaign. Facing a tough re-election on November 3rd, the back-to-back agreements could help bolster Trump's electoral appeal to pro-Israel evangelical voters in the United States, an important chunk of his political base. The signing ceremony came amid a deadly coronavirus pandemic, which has killed nearly 200,000 Americans, devastated the US economy, and threatened to derail Trump's re-election.
Good for him for having a distraction on a day when the numbers of people who are affected and the numbers of people who are dying from this virus only increases.
Trump, however, views the occasion as a foreign policy achievement that will please the Zionist, Saudi and Emirati lobbies after his other big foreign policy initiatives, from Iran to Venezuela and North Korea, have all failed.
Trump moved to make this deal between Tel Aviv, Manama and Abu Dhabi is not only basically guaranteeing the support of the Saudi lobby, Emirati lobby, which they have a lot of money in Washington and they hired lots of basically public relation companies, but also the Zionist lobby. And the missing part perhaps would be the evangelicals in the United States. Their population is over 70 million, but the difference is that they are very different from, for example, the other religious groups in the United States in terms of they have a lot of money as well as political clout.
Trump can brag about normalization with Israel in the final stretch of the campaign. He argues that his personalized diplomacy achieved what his predecessors could not.
So in 72 years, they've done 2 agreements, and we've done 2, as you know, in a period of a month.
Is the normalization with Israel part of the Trump administration's effort to energize his supporters ahead of a tightly contested election?
He is behind in all the polls. Every independent survey shows that former Vice President Joe Biden is going to win the election in November. Donald Trump needs to shore up his base, which is very faithful to him, and needs to put some accomplishments within that. We have to remember that he has done many things that would be offensive to evangelicals. His treatment of women is extremely offensive to anybody, and certainly should be extremely offensive to evangelicals. But he is able to overcome that by pleasing Israel.
The agreement with the UAE potentially paves the way for advanced weapon sales to the kingdom. Trump is obsessed with arms sales. The president often cites weapon sales the main driver of continued US support for Arab states, especially Saudi Arabia, which he has repeatedly called a milk cow for America. Trump views the UAE, which has long wanted American F-35 fighter jets and larger drones, as another client.
وسيبعث الأمل حول العالم.
I stand here today to extend a hand of peace and receive a hand of peace. In our faith, we say, "O God, you are peace, and from you comes peace." The search for peace is an innate principle, yet principles are effectively realized when they are transformed into action. Today, we are already witnessing a change in the heart of the Middle East, a change that will send hope around the world.
So, yeah, they'd like to buy F-35s. We'll see what happens. It's under review.
The United States has been unable to sell the advanced weaponry to the Emirates because of its commitment to the Israeli regime's military advantage. The normalization with Israel will potentially remove that obstacle.
More than that, they're ready to spend such a big amount of money to be spent on the most expensive fighter jet in the history of the military in the world. Not because this weapon is actually good, because it proved actually to be contrary. It's basically proven to be a big scam. But what they can purchase with this money is actually the support of the American elites, not only Trump, but also all of those people who are allies or under the influence of the American arms sellers, the American weapon sellers, and therefore they're trying to create a deeper connection in Washington, D.C.
Bahrain may have also agreed to normalization with Israel to gain access to advanced weaponry. The Saudis could potentially follow suit.
They also have competition with each other. Emiratis, they do have competition with, for example, Riyadh. We have seen such competition in Yemen. At the beginning, they basically committed this crime in Yemen. They actually were accomplice of killing a lot of innocent people in Yemen.
President Trump has said he would have no problem selling Middle Eastern countries the same weapon system sold to the Israeli regime. He noted it would be good for American jobs.
You know, selling our stuff is good for our country in one way.
Israel
and
gets
what
upset.
I've learned about military equipment, you sell it today and it's obsolete tomorrow. All of a sudden you'll say, well, we have a new plane, a new and better plane. No, I know the leader very well, Mohammed. I would have no problem in selling them the F-35. I would have absolutely no problem. I view it as an asset, not a liability. Plus, it's tremendous jobs at home.
Were arms sales an important factor in the U.S. brokered normalization with Israel?
He likes to make money. That's why he will sell arms to any nation, regardless of how they're using them. One example of this is his sales of arms to Saudi Arabia, which is using them to decimate the people of Yemen in contravention of international law and basic human decency. Now, with this new agreement between the Emirates and Israel, it will open the door to sales of more weaponry to the Emirates.
The normalization process may also be perceived as an attempt by the Trump administration to escalate the pressure campaign against Iran and its allies. For years, the Israeli regime has had covert relations with a number of Persian Gulf Arab monarchies, driven by a de facto alliance against Iran. In this conflict, Trump saw an opening to push these Arab regimes closer to Israel.
The biggest rival of the United States in this region, in the Persian Gulf, is the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Islamic Republic of Iran actually proved that it is very capable of making a lot of damage to the U.S. interest and basically burning the entire West Asia with the long-range drones, missiles, as well as Tehran's allies and the axis of resistance. For example, the resistance in Yemen, the resistance in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria, and various regions.
Iran condemned the normalization of relations between Israel and the UAE as an instance of strategic folly that will only strengthen the regional resistance front. The Islamic Revolution Guards Corps, the IRGC, also said that the Bahraini regime will face harsh revenge from Muslim nations. Is the normalization trend part of the Trump administration's so-called maximum pressure campaign against Iran? And how will it play out in the long term? Martial law. What if Trump loses? As the US presidential campaign enters into the final stretch, President Trump is finding himself in an impossible situation. The president is struggling to regain his balance, and multiple revelations about his lies about the coronavirus and his breathtaking disregard for America's fallen soldiers and military leaders. The controversies have created a furor that has kept Trump from effectively handling a re-election challenge. With support hovering around 43% nationally, Trump needs to attract new supporters to overcome Joe Biden's lead of about 8 points. For months, Trump has planted the seed that he might not leave the office willingly if he loses, casting doubt on the integrity of the American elections. Trump seems to be laying the groundwork for claiming victory no matter what.
Are you suggesting that you might not accept the results of the election?
I have to say it. No, I'm not going to just say yes. I'm not going to say no, and I didn't last time either. Because the only way we're going to lose this election is if the election is rigged. Remember that.
As Americans prepare to cast their votes, a nightmare scenario looms large. What if Trump loses but refuses to concede?
There will be a turmoil in the American society, but how big that turmoil will be, that's the place of debate. Because not everyone in the American society is willing to take action, for example, come on the streets and protest, perhaps using violence. How Trump supporters would react? Are they ready to take arms and react and support the Trump on the streets, or they are basically able and capable to defeat the other party? How military reacts to that? These are all the basically unknown variables of this equation.
The vast majority of Americans expect an orderly transition of power if Trump loses the election to his Democratic contender Joe Biden.
We would expect nothing less than acknowledgement of a loss from Trump, and we would expect him to concede. We would expect the same from Biden should the election go in the other way, which is kind of actually interesting because you hear people urging Biden not to concede no matter what to Trump. So we're in a situation where we, the people, need to step up and basically make our voices known.
This year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, some 80 million are expected to vote by mail, double the number in 2016. The concern now, however, is that ballot deliveries could be delayed, raising questions about whether they will count.
I don't want to see an election, so many years I've been watching elections, and they say the projected winner or the winner of the election. I don't want to see that take place in a week after November 3rd, or a month, or years.
Trump has warned of mail-in voting being fraudulent. However, he himself stands accused of attempting to sabotage the Postal Service to boost his re-election chances. The president has also encouraged his supporters to vote twice, once by mail and once in person, even though that is illegal.
These people are playing dirty politics. Dirty politics. So if you have an absentee ballot, or as I call it, a solicited ballot, you send it in. But I would check it in any event. I would go and follow it and go vote. And everybody here wants to vote. We vote.
Experts and a handful of public officials have sounded the alarm that the election day could prove a disaster.
Even in the absence of any sort of political maneuvering, you're going to have a problem if you try and expand the number of people that are voting by mail, especially if you extend it into states and regions that have never done that before. So you simply have you've got technical problems, you've got organizational problems, all of those on top of what's going on right now.
Democratic Senator Ron Wyden has warned that America could be headed towards an electoral Chernobyl.
Well, that is possible, actually. That is quite possible, because Trump is ready to take any actions to remain in power. But how the other side, the American society, would react to that, those parts of the American society which are basically against Trump, that would change this. Because Trump, for sure, he's counting on his supporters, particularly his armed supporters, to perhaps back him, be on the streets, cast fear into the hearts of the people.
What are the likely scenarios? How would Trump, his enablers and supporters react if the president were to lose the election?
You can smell it, that he's ready to take such action, that if the results are not in favor of him, he might react and basically mobilizes his supporters. Nowadays, we do see his supporters on the streets in the protest scenes. They're basically putting on shirts with the American flag. They're carrying automatic weapons, even in those areas that the automatic weapons are not permitted to be carried openly in public.
Trump received a word of advice from Roger Stone, his longtime confidant and former campaign advisor. Stone, the dirty trickster as he's often called, advised the president to deploy federal agents to physically block voting in order to prevent the Democrats from stealing the election. Stone, whose 40-month prison sentence for lying to Congress was commuted by Trump, also suggested that the president should seize total power if he loses in the November election.
If someone will study the president's authority in the Insurrection Act and in his ability to impose martial law, he will have the authority to arrest Zuckerberg, to arrest Tim Cook, to arrest the Clintons, to arrest anybody else who can be proven to be involved in illegal activity.
The advice seems to have boded well with President Trump.
There are threats. They say that they're going to threaten riots if they lose on election night, assuming we get a winner on election night. What are you going to do?
We'll put them down very quickly
if they do that.
We have the right to do that. We have the power to do that if we want. Look, it's called insurrection. We just send in and we do it very easy. I mean, it's very easy. I'd rather not do that because there's no reason for it. But if we had to, we'd do that and put it down within minutes.
Will Trump send troops to shut down protests if he loses but doesn't accept the result?
I think he will be trying that if he will be facing an unrest on the streets. He will also perhaps counting on his allies in Pentagon, but how they react to his call to be mobilized and will be present on these streets, that's something else. I highly doubt that the American military is ready to really take this command and face the basically resistance from the American people who are against Trump.
Is America potentially headed for another civil war?
That's been a constant drumbeat. There are people on the left and on the right who desperately would like that to be the case. And you can see Roger Stone obviously is one of them. You definitely have people on the left advising the Democrats who think that a civil war would be fantastic for the results, for the seeking to transform America.
Trump has indicated he might invoke the 1807 Insurrection Act, which would give him the authority to deploy troops to crush any civil unrest. The military leadership has strongly advised against that, further escalating tensions with the president.
The military is subservient to the American people and to our political leadership. Their job is to deal with threats to America, not to deal with political internal squabblings. Whether or not Trump decides that he is going to refuse to leave office or Biden decides that he is going to refuse to concede, that is a political situation. And I admire the American military for essentially saying, no, this is not our situation. This is not something that we get involved in.
Democrats and some progressive groups reportedly have been huddling to game out a post-election apocalypse scenario.
If you have the departments, the Homeland Security Department, the military, and all the other elements of executive power, you have an enormous advantage. And so you have to play off that insight, and you have to start to develop mechanisms, means, legal and otherwise, to combat that incredible advantage, especially if you have someone who is unscrupulous, dishonest, frankly, and willing to go beyond the law to do whatever he needs to do to stay in power. And that's a problem. That's a real challenge.
A contested election would trigger a constitutional crisis at a time when America is having a new reckoning with racial injustice. The risk of civil unrest would pose a dilemma for Congress, courts, and the military. Congress can play a role in determining the victor, but that comes down to good faith and willingness to compromise.
That would absolutely be contentious. You've got some very diehard supporters on the right with the Republicans pushing for Trump. You've got some very diehard supporters on the left pushing for Biden. If we were to go to a contested election in Congress, I honestly think that the Libertarian candidate, Joe Jorgensen, would be a fantastic compromise.
In the year 2000, a legal fight between George W. Bush and Al Gore over vote counting in Florida landed in the Supreme Court, which ruled in Bush's favor by stopping a recount. But Al Gore accepted the ruling and conceded.
I think the result of the Supreme Court is pretty much predictable because the majority of the judges in the Supreme Court are allies of Trump. During the last few years, Trump actually installed 2 of them in their positions. So therefore, that's the balance which would weigh in favor of Trump.
Democrats could also dismiss the election as unfair if Trump were to win the Electoral College, where he has an advantage, but lose the popular vote to Biden. It'll be interesting to watch how things will unfold after Election Day.